Well, good day, Chairmen. Nice
Good
to
day.
see you all. I don't know if you guys noticed, but if you watch on YouTube now, I was able to find a geolocation that is in fact Tone Town.
No way.
And
Yes.
I don't actually know where it is, but it says whenever you click it, it's like however many thousand miles away from my current location. So somewhere in the world, there is a Tone Town.
Can we buy like 3 square feet? Can we buy 3 square feet of land in Town? Just so we actually have a physical destination. We could put like a super reputable vintage fuzz in a airtight case in Town.
Right. Cemented into the ground.
Imagine. That's beautiful.
So anyway, from this point forward, we will now tag Tone Town when we are doing our geotag for our YouTube video, because that's where, even if we're not there yet, that's where we're heading. Mm-hmm. And just as a side of something that is so helpful, if you are finding the content that we speak about each week useful to you, the easiest and best way to support us is to write us a review on iTunes. And I know that maybe some of you listen to this on other platforms, and we would be happy to accept a review there. But for whatever reason, all of the other podcast apps seem to look at what the iTunes reporting is, and then they use that to inform their rankings of how they rank order podcasts in certain categories. And although we're number one in Bangladesh, shout out to all of our fans there, we want to make sure that we're moving toward number one in other markets as well, potentially the one that you're in. So if you wouldn't mind writing us a review, we would love to have you do that on iTunes. It really helps us, and again, helps us be able to promote and propagate our audience. And if you like it, it's likely that other people will like it, who are like you, that love gear, that love paddleboard. So please do that. But today I have a very interesting topic to discuss. I know we say that every week, but this is interesting just like the rest of them are. I saw that a few weeks ago that Reverb had put out a signal path video. And I'm always interested to see what other people say about this. And I think to a large degree, when you talk about signal path, as we've talked about in our shows here, some of it has some subjectivity, and you can have some amount of, differences in opinion in the way that things go. And certainly, ultimately, it's up to the player to decide what works best for them and what's the sound that they hear in their head. And that may defy convention. But there are some basic building blocks if we're talking about sort of things like titles like Signal Path 101 or the basics to Signal Path that I think are sort of core tenets that are really somewhat immovable if you're kind of talking about the basics. Of course, we expect that people might improvise over that. But when you say that you're doing a beginner's guide, or what they call going back to school on pedal order, I think it's incredibly important, if you're tasking yourself with that, to really deliver on the information. And so we're going to go through Reverb's particular order that they lay out, and they have both a text format and a video format. And we'll mostly be referencing the video because they do more sound examples and things like that, and you can see the pedals a little bit better. But I will link both in the description and in the show notes so that you're able to check that out if you're watching on YouTube or listening, if you're curious about it. But I think, spoiler alert, I think that they kind of fall short here, I don't know this for a fact, but it seems as though, similarly to the Guitar Player magazine article that we talked about a few episodes ago, it seems like this was sort of a tee for them to be able to talk about links to Reverb and sales for other pedals. And so this is sort of a springboard for potentially that. I don't know. But I think we get into the details of it here to kind of continue. But I know that you guys have all had a chance to look at the article and look at the video. Any just kind of gut reactions before we start getting into their proposed signal path?
I think I will say this. I don't think everything. I watched the video. I didn't read the text format. I'm a man of the 21st century. Love a video, and I basically went through it. And there were a couple things right at the beginning of the video. I was like, oh, this isn't good. Like, this is going downhill. But towards the end, I will say, I won't give it all away now. I won't give it all away now. There were some things towards the end of the video. I was like, that was actually great. I totally agree with that. I'm glad you included this in the signal chain talk. So I would take, personally, if this was my pedal board, I would take little bits of this article and I would say, yes, absolutely. And other parts I would strongly disagree with. So I wouldn't throw the whole thing out. I wouldn't take the whole thing as gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the same way. There were some really good aspects of it, but then there were some I was like, yeah, I don't quite agree with that, or, understand their point. But yeah, there was some, I have to agree with Grant on that. There were some things that I did like and would do, and some things I would not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's true. I think there are some things that I think made sense and would align with anything that we've said. I think the challenge here, just like with Guitar Player, is like there's so many people that read or watch what somebody like a Reverb is doing, because arguably they now own even more of the market share than a Guitar Player magazine, because Reverb has really only been in a digital space, and they seem to really do well at getting information out, of promoting products and things like that. That for a lot of people, whatever it is that they say is pretty much taken at face value. And so I think that puts the responsibility on them as even higher to get this stuff right. And so I'm just sort of surprised that it seems like in some aspects this was kind of phoned in. And this is not talking about the presenter. He seems to do a really good job at sort of relaying the information, whether we agree with it or not, and give some sound examples of kind of each of those effects, which, I think are totally fine and acceptable. And I don't even know that this was something that he wrote or he scripted, but I think just Reverb in general could do a lot better than this. And I think that they left a lot of things on the table and had some missed opportunities. So let's get into it. So I'm gonna share my screen here if you're watching on YouTube, and this is going to give you the best. It's going to give you the best view of it. But let me blow it up. So if you're looking at this, you're seeing the article, and it kind of goes through the same thing that the video will go through, and I'll just pull up the video here. And I've got it on mute, but the first thing that he talks about when he goes into Signal Path is he talks about the tuner at about 2 minutes. So I'll bring us to roughly 2 minutes. And the first thing that he talks about when he gets into the basics is he talks about the first thing in the Signal Path is a tuner. And he has, for this example, a Sonic Research tuner, the ST200, which is actually a really fine tuner. I have no objections whatsoever to that tuner.
Same.
And then he goes into the wah. So as far as the Signal Path, and that's also kind of mirrored here. First tuner. They actually, they lump wah into filters, which is true. So far in that Signal Path order, tuner, then wah. Any objections there so far?
Brian?
The only question I would have, and this is actually the first thing I saw, is some tuners have buffers, and
yep.
If you're placing a fuzz after this tuner, like, you're gonna have, you're from the rule of thumb, I've always had people, don't do buffers before fuzzes because they react completely different. So that was the first thing. Like, I don't typically do tuner first unless it's like the very first in, but like for me, I don't run a fuzz, so I can do that. But right. If someone is running a fuzz on the board, I would not do tuner first.
If it had a buffer.
If it had a buffer, correct.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And he doesn't make any distinction about this. He just says tuner. That's it. He doesn't say anything about true bypass. He doesn't say anything about buffers. And I think for people listening that haven't experienced this before, to use a few key F words here, if you put a buffer before your fuzz, it's going to sound farty and flabby, and it's not going to, what's another F word we could use?
Thin.
That's not
it
an
can
F
get
word
pretty
though,
thin
Mason.
on the top end.
Fugly.
Fugly. Thank you. Yes. So I think with the tuner that he has in the video, I don't have a problem with that.
You're right.
But he doesn't make any distinction, in which case I do have a problem. And some vintage wahs even. I know, Mason, you're into a lot of vintage effects as well, and you've mentioned in previous videos when we chatted Signal Chain about like even treble boosters don't like buffers. And there's a whole kind of category of pedals that your tuner, if we're going to talk just blanket statement tuner, should be after. And so I think the fact he doesn't bring that up in a video for beginners, or the basics, I should say, I think that was a missed opportunity, as you said before.
Yeah, I agree with this. I think that the wah thing coming next, and even the Crybaby, even if it's a newer rendition of a Crybaby, most wah-wah pedals that are styled after vintage wahs, even if they are not themselves vintage, will generally have some consequence of putting a buffer into them. They won't sound exactly the same. And the intention, just as those pedals when they were made, they were pretty much seeing the guitar immediately, nothing else. And in their suggestions of purchases, on the article side, both of the tuners that they show have buffers.
Correct.
So the Polytune and the Boss TU3W. Now, these have options to convert them to true bypass with like toggle switches and stuff like that on both accounts. But again, with no distinction made, in his individual signal path with his particular pedals, it wouldn't matter if the wah is in that position because his tuner's true bypass. But he doesn't say that, and most people are probably going to have a Boss tuner. Like that's the most popular tuner out there. So I think that that's really an important distinction that that is not made. So far we have a few challenges there. He then goes into under the same category of what he calls wahs, filters, and envelope filters. Then around 234 goes into the Game Changer audio sustain pedal, the plus.
Plus, yeah.
So it goes into the Game Changer Plus. Now, what's your thoughts on this? Because this is kind of like a phrase sampler where like you can play something, it holds, and then you can continue to play over the top of it. What's your feeling on this in this position, or just this pedal pick in general to exemplify wahs, filters, and envelope filters?
I love this pedal. I'm a big fan of this pedal. It is about as niche of a pedal as you could possibly choose, though. Like, love what Game Changer does. They have some great gear. This is like a new take on phrase samplers and like the EHX Freeze, and like it's all in that vein. The fact that they picked it on a basics board, though, I was just like, what the heck? Like, this is where it's like you're trying to sell the pedal. Like, that's right. It's not a great pick for this section on the board. It's not something that the majority of your customers are going to have or can relate to. Although I think if you did have this pedal, I think you would really enjoy it. So I had an issue with this pedal. The position of the pedal, he kind of says this in the video, like you could put it here or you could potentially put it later in your chain, but he really kind of focuses on this spot. And when I'm chatting to people about signal chain phrase samplers, I always describe to them, same with loopers, like something that loops your signal and plays it back, not a true bypass looper. With loopers, I always chat to them like if you put it early in your chain, you can then turn effects on and off after that pedal and change the loop live, essentially. But as soon as you turn a pedal off after the recording, it will take that effect off of the recording in air quotes as well. Whereas if you put the phrase sampler towards the end after a reverb or after a chorus, whatever you record is permanently in that loop regardless of what you turn on and off. And the fact that he didn't touch on any of that, I was a little a little disappointed. Obviously, there's only so much you can touch on in a signal chain video, and it could be hours long. But I think overall, I was just thinking, like, why'd you pick this pedal in a basics video? This is a niche pedal type category.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while since I put one of these on. It's just mono, right? From what I can remember.
Has an effects loop.
Yeah. Oh, it does have an effects loop. So even if, like, you know, and the effects loop is probably mono too. Yeah. So like the fact is, like, this unfortunately only can be used, yes, towards the front of the chain. Somewhere after all your wet effects might be really cool for some of the stuff that you could do with it, or like if you really wanted to, because anytime I've had one of these, it's been in a switcher, so people could kind of rearrange the order which it was, but it was always like, just don't put it after this effect because it is mono. So yeah, I agree with you. It's a very, like, niche pedal of where, like, how to use it. I remember the first time we got one in, it was just like, okay, first off, how does this work? Like, just like without watching videos or reading anything, it was just like, all right, how does this thing work? And we like adjusted the settings on the back, and we're just like, oh, okay, that's how they, like, it just took time, and it's definitely not like something that everyone's going to use.
You have to have grade 3 piano to actually use this pedal as well. I think it's stipulated on the website.
Yeah, well, I think of, you know, this pedal is obviously similar, as you mentioned, Grant, to the EHX Freeze, and mostly when I see people use that, they actually tend to use it almost in a similar place that you might find a volume pedal, because it basically, kicking it on, you have all the dry effects kind of sampled in it, and then you have sort of the delay in modulation, sort of trail stuff happening like after it, like the textural stuff can occur after it. And so I've seen a lot of people use it like that. He says the reason he puts it here is that it requires, or it's optimized with a pure guitar signal.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason that he says that he puts it in this particular position. And I don't know that necessarily, you know, in his particular signal path, moving it down a few would hurt anything. I think the only thing that could possibly create a problem here is like the way that the position with which he's using the harmonist pedal, which we can talk about in a minute, which I think is incorrect. But before we go further into this, I want to break for a moment to talk about a few of our sponsors that make the podcast possible every single week. The first of which is our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary. And if you're not familiar with the Guitar Sanctuary, it is one of the premier dealerships of guitar effects, amplifiers, and guitar instruments in the country, based in McKinney, Texas. All of the boutique items that you can think of as far as pedals are concerned, all of the beautiful custom shops, whether it's from Fender or Gibson or some of the boutique guitar makers, and all of the amplifiers that you can think of, including probably one of the flagship Mesa Boogie stores in all of the country. It is none other than our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary. And beyond that, our friend Brian Omilion is housed within the Guitar Sanctuary, and any of the gear that you buy there, you can always bring over to him to assemble into a beautiful pedalboard rig for you. And Brian's services are available as well on the Guitar Sanctuary website. Feel free to check them out, see all the different offerings that they have, or say hey to Brian, or request a quote for him to build your pedalboard. They're at theguitarsanctuary.com. And again, just a wonderful, wonderful dealership, great inventory, great selection, great service. I think you're really going to dig it. Secondly, our friends over at Sweetwater have an amazing new program that they have launched at the end of 2022, and it is just steamrolling into 2023, which is their gear exchange. And it is a way that people like you and me can buy and sell used gear, similarly to what you would do on eBay or Reverb. And I really like this site because it sort of combines the best elements of the things that I like about Reverb and eBay, combined with something that's a little bit more, I don't know, grassrootsy, like a Craigslist. And I find that you can find amazing deals there. I find that it is a really easy system to work with. And moreover, I think the really cool thing is that they allow you to save all your seller fees that you would ordinarily pay by selling gear on these sort of third-party sites. You don't have to pay any seller fees so long as you take all of your profits and put them on a Sweetwater gift card. And if you're somebody like me who's regularly shopping at Sweetwater, this is a no-brainer. Saves on those fees, which can really add up when you're talking about 3% for credit card and so whatever percentage just for listing. It just adds up very quickly. And this is a good way to save on all that, especially if you're going to be buying more stuff from places like Sweetwater, which again have amazing service and have a great selection of gear. So I highly recommend that you check out our friends over at Sweetwater's Gear Exchange. And you just go to sweetwater.com/used. You can create an account. You can start buying and selling right away. And I've had some wonderful experiences and been able to get some great stuff. So I really, really appreciate this service. And I'm really excited to see how it continues to grow and evolve as it continues to gain more customers and more people using it, more users. So check that out. Sweetwater.com/used. It is a Sweetwater Gear Exchange. Now let's get back to the article. All right. Let me find my article first. This always happens to me when I like unshare the
I think it's the curse of Zoom, where it's just it can be really hard to find your window again.
Yeah, I don't know what the heck happened to it.
It makes me feel a little bit better that I'm not the only one, because whenever it happens to me, I'm like, I'm getting old. I can't even find my window. Like,
it's not just grandma. I found it. Here we go. All right, so we were at the Game Changer Audio, and we were talking about and this again was lumped into filters. I don't know that I would consider this a filter. That was the other thing. Would you consider this in line with WAS filters and envelope filters?
I mean, you might be able to make a case for it being dynamic, but at the same time, I just don't see it. I think this is a pretty flexible pedal as far as signal chain goes. Yeah. And I think it needs to be treated as such. I think this is a pedal you need to think, what do I want to be recorded on this micro loop that is repeated, in infinity? And I think you need to adjust your signal chain accordingly, whereas filter pedals would be a bit more, you'd be a little bit more picky where you put those in your signal chain.
Yeah. All right.
I agree.
Let's move on to the next one. The next pedal that he goes to after the Plus is the Keeley Compressor Mini. And this is, I guess, just under compressors. Generally, I don't have any objection to this position. I mean, let's just kind of remove the Game Changer pedal for now. I think that this is probably where you would put a compressor in this context if you're kind of using something that's just a pedal-based style compressor. No objections to this placement. What about you guys?
I'm surprised, Mason. I thought you were going to have an objection here. I feel like I'm starting to get an idea of what you guys like in signal chain, and that surprises me to hear you say that. But maybe if I can make some assumptions, Mason, correct me if I'm wrong on your opinion here, you would put more of a studio-style compressor in a pedal format after gain stages. Is that more accurate? Because personally, on my board, this is where I typically put a compressor. I'm not opposed to putting it after gain, but this is usually just where it ends up based on feel and sound, and I just like it. Yeah. But I know that in the past you've chatted about compressor after gain stages.
Yeah, so I would say that the place to put compressors, if you want it to be like a pedal style compressor, like this is like based on a Ross, that was always a pedal style compressor, or an orange squeezer that was like a module plug-in that would go into the guitar. For those types of compressors, putting them up front makes sense because that's kind of what they were designed. That was what the intent was. But if you're using something like an 1176 replica or an LA2A,
like a Cali compact,
those really should be, if you're treating them like a studio compressor, they would come after the gain, because ordinarily you wouldn't hit the compressor until you got into the mixing board. So this is just kind of a difference in how you might run it. But for this type of compressor, This is where I would run it if you're running a Ross. That's what
Nice.
the Keeley is based on. So no objections there. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the compressor. Typically, like I don't have a compressor right now, but a lot of times when I have a compressor, it is after drives. But it all kind of comes down to the type of compression that you're using. Some of them sound really great before drives. Some of them sound really great after drives. You know, the great thing with switchers and stuff nowadays, you know, or anything, you can just kind of move the order around and kind of see how pedals react. Because any way you change your order, those pedals are not going to react the same way and when you start stacking other stuff. So this placement for this compressor I think is great. If it was another compressor, I might put it after drives.
Okay. All right, but I'd say overall we don't have any objections with this particular item in this order. He then
Correct.
goes on to 408. He goes into this pedal. Now this is where it gets a little weird. Next in the order, he says, and just to recap, we've had tuner, wah, the Game Changer Plus sustain pedal compressor, and then he says pitch shifters, synth pedals, and more. And then as the exemplar, it's the Electro-Harmonix Intelligent Harmony Machine, which is like a harmonizer. What do you guys think?
Go for it, Brian.
I've always put these kind of things more towards the front. I wouldn't put it after a compressor. I would probably put it before. You know, that I don't do a lot of these pitched synth pedals. I mean, I did one for a keys board because he did synth and stuff. So it worked out great wherever kind of he wanted it. But for me, any of these pedals, I have been requested or I've typically recommended it closer in the front of the chain. Depending, I mean, it wouldn't be before fuzz or anything, but it wouldn't be this far down the chain personally.
And my logic here, especially with synth pedals, and I think this would probably still apply to the Intelligent Harmony Machine, but with synths especially, in my conversation with customers is like, do you want this to act like, let's say you're playing guitar into your synth pedal, just as a very basic example. Do you want the synth to now be your instrument? Like, are you now a synth player in essence? Or
Right.
Are you just trying to add a little bit of that synth touch and you still want the characteristics of the guitar to really be the main thing? And 9 times out of 10, like when the synth pedal is on, I want it to be my instrument. I want it to act like that. In which case, I tell them, okay, let's try and get it as close to the front of your chain as possible. And so in this case, I would probably also put this, like Brian said before, the compressor. But I think the bigger, I know we'll get to this later in the episode, the bigger thing here is less about following a stringent black and white rule of synth always goes first, and more of asking yourself, what are you trying to achieve? And let's tailor your signal chain to suit your end goals. And I think that would be no different here as well. Again, I think the Harmony Machine is a little bit of a weird example in this spot, but that's probably, we've been there. We've talked about that.
Yeah, I think it's also a misnomer, because if you had an actual harmonizer, I would put it much later, like with choruses and stuff like that, almost as a modulation effect. Like let's say you had like the Eventide, micro pitch, which is a harmonizer based on the H3000. That would go later, like with choruses and stuff like that. But I think actually, what you said, Grant, is exactly how I describe it to people as well. Where it's like, if you're looking for the pedal to replace an instrument, like putting it in that position as though it was the first thing, whether you're talking about a mellotron or synth or whatever it's going to be, whatever the pedal is trying to emulate, that would go in that position. I think, interestingly, I feel like in their actual description on the article, and I'm kind of going back there, they show the whammy as the visual, which is really, to me, sort of divorced from what this does. Two different categories. Like, to me, it's not the same pedal. And so I think that maybe some of the pedal selection is actually confusing the points that they're trying to make. And I don't know if it's because the demonstrator had a particular affinity for these pedals or Reverb had a particular affinity for these pedals. But I actually think it would have made more sense to use something like a whammy or a drop pedal, because it actually is more indicative of what they're trying to get across here in terms of the pitch stuff.
Yeah.
And if this is the case, I believe that what they really meant to say here was like whammies, that these should exist again as close to the guitar as possible, because they are tracking the guitar in trying to take whatever the pitches of the guitar that's coming in, and then you're making different adjustments to that, either sharp or flat or whatever it may be that you're doing with your whammy or your drop.
Can we get controversial?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do it.
This is where I start to disagree with you a bit, Mason.
Okay.
Which I know is allowed on the show, but I don't want it to detract from my value and appreciation of you as a person. But I will say I've done a lot of experimenting with this myself, mostly with a Pog. So less about fifths, thirds, minor sevenths, whatever it might be, and more about just straight octaves.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do some actual experimenting, and I do not have perfect pitch. I'm not hearing, a couple of synths out and all that as far as tracking goes. But growing up with guitar and pedal boards, it was always put Pog first because of tracking over and over and over again. And one day I was like, let's just test it. Can I actually hear if I put a crazy amount of gain and fuzz, like things that will mask potentially the pitch so that the Pog might track less accurately? And so I did A/B tests back and forth before and after these crazy amount of gain and clipping, and I never noticed a difference that was worth noting. And I actually really liked the sound of my Pog after my gain, because when the Pog was turned on, the Pog effect, the octave effect, came through more clearly. It was more pronounced. So it was like, okay, when my Pog is on, it's impossible to miss the fact that my Pog is on. Whereas when the Pog was early on, it was definitely noticeable. I'm not going to say it wasn't, but it wasn't as prominent in the mix. And so this is one where I will chat to a customer. If it's for my board, I'll kind of try both. What do I really want to get out of this board? And I will put it in the signal chain spot that suits my needs. But I do know, like, I'm sure tracking is a thing with this, but I think it's really easy for people to hear, oh, you're going to have tracking issues if you put it later, and think they're going to be like half a tone out, or the Pog is going to get all glitchy and just sound horrible. So that's my only thing.
That's true. I think with the Pog, you can have that flexibility, and there are a lot of people that use it that way. I think also with like the octave, like a Boss OC2 or OC, whatever number they're up to, you'll see people use it before, early on in the chain for tracking purposes. You also see guys like John Mayer use it after drive pedals. But I think where it comes to like the drop or like the whammy, I don't think that that's true, because a lot of the purposes of something like the drop is sort of the same thing that we talked about with the synth, where if you want to have a guitar that's tuned a half step down, it doesn't work as well if you put it further down the chain. It really needs to be like as close to guitar as possible. In the whammy, similarly, although you're manipulating that in real time with the foot pedal, I think that really needs to be earlier too, and should be before dynamic pedals like the compressor, because the compressor is going to change the bandwidth, and that can change the way that it tracks. And so there's two things I don't understand. If this is what they meant, I don't know why they chose. And when I say this, I'm pointing to the whammy. They meant whammy. I'm not sure why they put in the Intelligent Harmony Machine as a substitution for that. And furthermore, I don't think that this placement, if that's really what they meant, should be here. Brian, I want to hear from you on this as well.
No, I completely agree. Are we talking about this EHX, or are we talking about a Pog?
I'm talking about the EHX one. I mean, I think that a Pog actually in this position might have been, really fit more into octave. Okay. But I guess you could make a case for it here. I would say that would have made more sense in this position if they had done it, because it's a little bit more versatile than like a drop, or a whammy. In its placement, maybe not in its function. But yeah, I just again, it's. I feel like they're kind of choosing maybe some pedals that are more obscure that sort of convolutes the point that they're trying to make.
Yeah, it's a little confusing even for me just sitting here and listening to you guys kind of, talk about how you feel about it. Seeing the article and then not seeing this in the article, super confusing. Like it just like it doesn't like if you're gonna say, hey, use a drop or use a whammy, then show a drop or a whammy. Maybe that was an oopsie on them or something. But I also think that this is definitely one of those pedals that is not like as well known to a lot of people. So maybe that's a bit of a showcasing it there, trying to show it off. But on like a POG level, I've done POGs before and after drives and stuff, and I've done them after and I've really liked it, but I've done it before too and I've liked it. So there's kind of depends on how much of a presence you want out of that pedal that you kind of have to determine, because so much of this is so much by our own ears. I like how you like overdrive combinations, in what order and how they stack. The same thing with this kind of stuff. But for this exact area, the drop or the whammy would have been the drop or the whammy would have probably been a little bit better of a highlight in the video, because it is a good placement and I've done that before. But something like this, it just seems kind of out of left field that they showed it.
And before we move on to the next pedal, do we want to break for just a moment, Brian, so that you can tell us about some of our amazing sponsors?
Absolutely, yeah. So, we all, we say it every week, we all, we're building, and you need to get, your pedal supplies or your, for building a board or your platforms, your cabling from somewhere, and Creation Music Company is all of our go-to for plugs, cable, flatboards, bridges, extension feet. They do pretty much everything that I need, actually everything, to complete a board. And as we've all said, if I don't get at least 5 orders from Creation in a week, then it's a slow week, and I have 3 coming in today. So it is already a very busy week.
Nice.
But they are running the promotion Creation 15 for 15% off.
The Chairmen 15.
Chairmen 15. Thank you. I don't know why I thought it was Creation. I have a lot of discount codes in my phone, so I forgot. So Chairmen 15% off. It does exclude some of their customized boards and cases, and their plugs are already on discount, so you don't have to worry about using the discount code for that. But I would say hit them up. They are amazing. John and the crew are fantastic, and we are grateful for them as a sponsor.
Agreed.
Great.
Yeah, get yourself some plugs, some great supplies. Chairman 15, get that discount, and that's 85% away from free. So,
as we like to say on the show.
Yeah.
I do like that. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Let's see if I can master the screen share. And there we go. Look at that.
Quick,
I'm getting it.
Wow.
Look at me now. All right. And so after the pitch shifters, it then moves on to dirt and gain. And he's using the plumes from Earthquaker Devices as his exemplar. I don't have any objections to this as the overdrive. But here's where it gets a little bit interesting. Is he uses this as the category of dirt and gain, and then he goes to a Oz fuzz or OZ fuzz, also in the category of dirt and gain, right after the plumes. Now this is where I think probably the biggest mistake that is made in this video occurs, and is not unlike the mistake that many people over and over again have in their own rigs. And so it's almost it's almost comical that this common issue with signal path occurs in a video that's supposed to undo common misunderstandings about signal path, which is the OZ or Oz fuzz is a vintage fuzz. It is a vintage fuzz that uses germanium parts, and I looked it up because I was curious about what was inside of it, and so I saw one that was for sale on Reverb, the same place that this is from, and you can see right here if you go down to the bottom, germanium and silicon transistors, USSR capacitors, switchcraft jacks. It is either a germanium or a silicon fuzz, and then in the photos that it shows, it looks like it was using some Mullard germanium transistors. It looked like it was maybe like an OC 45, and I can't believe that this is the order, because as we well know, it is well documented, not just amongst us, but I think people generally, when they're talking about signal path in a professional realm, we know that you are never, ever, ever supposed to be putting impedance sensitive devices like a fuzz, treble booster, in some cases wah, especially using germanium transistors, after any sort of buffering, especially not after any sort of overdrive device. This needs to be as close to the guitar as possible. What do you guys think?
Grant,
there's not much else to say. I mean, yeah, I was shocked. Mason, I'm surprised you're not screaming and trashing your computer and breaking necks off your guitars right now. Like, this is kind of rule number one about pedal boards. You know, if there's a whole lot of rules that we have chatted about and will chat about in today's episode that are flexible. Like, signal chain of the majority of your pedals is up for grabs. This is not one that's up for grabs, unless you are after a choked, like we were talking about earlier, a choked sound on your fuzz that isn't responsive, sounds flabby, and just not pleasant to the ears. So I'm sure someone out there is saying, well, I love the sound of a buffer into my vintage fuzz, and all the power to you. This is a great place for it. For everyone else that's trying to get a responsive dynamic sound out of their rig, this is not where you put a fuzz pedal. You need to put it, like you said, at the beginning. So I was surprised, to say the least, and it discredits the rest of the video and article because of this one statement, in my opinion.
Well, I'm wondering too, it actually doesn't in the article side,
I don't see it.
It doesn't. It shows the Electro-Harmonix one, which is an op-amp fuzz, which is fine. This would have been fine to use there if they wanted to do that, but they didn't do that. And it says here in their article, it says one excellent way to get killer lead tone is to run something like a Marshall in the box type platform pedal for rhythm, and then stack a fuzz pedal into that. You can stack low gain pedals into high gain pedals, or vice versa, for escalating gain tones, or play with pretty much every other 3 pedal combo you can imagine. Experiment to find out what you really can do with what you've got. But on a side note, some fuzz pedals don't get along very well with the kind of buffer in front of them. And so it's funny that in the article they mention this, but in the video they use a buffer, or they use a fuzz pedal that has other pedals before it that presumably at some point would have some sort of buffer. And so I don't understand why, again, there's like this mismatch between the article and between what the video is actually saying. And we've seen this a couple of times, and I think that this is incredibly confusing, because I would suspect that there's going to be more viewership on the video than there will be on the article.
Oh yeah. It almost makes me wonder if they didn't talk about, like, if they wrote the article and then someone just did a video, because even down to some of the pedals, or even some of the pedals they're using in the video, even close to the same as the article. I mean,
it's tricky. One thing that he does say, one thing that he does say that I agree with is around like 520. He'll say, like you can put boosts anywhere. You know, you can put boost before or after the gain section, depending on what you want. I agreed with that. Around 544, he gets into volume pedals. And I would say the big thing here, this is kind of after the fuzzy goes into volume pedals. I would say the big thing here, I agree with this position of volume pedals if you're talking about after gain. But one thing that he doesn't talk about that I think is actually really important is volume pedal impedance, or where alternative places are to put it. And this could be in the effects loop in certain amps, or up front if you wanted to mirror more what the guitar volume pot does. And so I think that this was a missed opportunity to maybe talk about some other options as far as the volume pedal is concerned, and sort of why you might choose a high impedance versus a low impedance volume pedal. In his board in particular, if he's got pedals on or buffer pedals before this, he could be using a low impedance volume pedal, and the one that he's using there is actually a high impedance volume pedal, which would be better if you were using it first. And so I think that this is also a missed opportunity in terms of signal path to talk about some differences, which they do in other parts of the video with certain pedals, that this could go here, this could go here. They don't do that with volume pedals. Any feedback on that one, Grant or Brian?
I'm just gonna say I'm glad they didn't recommend using the tuner out. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah.
Like I would have expected it, but I agree. I mean, I actually had this conversation driving in this morning with my boss, and he had said, well, sometimes, you know, you can put pedals in the front of your chain and it just mimics your guitar. And I was like, yeah, but I do it after I do it before, after my drives, before my delays and reverbs and stuff. And he's like, yeah, but then you're capping your gain level of those pedals if you have it rolled back rather than, you know, just as if you were turning down your guitar. So I agree. There's definitely different placements in which you could put a volume pedal. But it all really, you know, depends on the pedal and a high impedance or low impedance.
Yeah, I don't think I have much more to add to that. I think you guys have covered it.
Okay. All right. Do we want to move on to the next pedal, or do we want to break again for another one of our amazing sponsors?
You know what, Mason? Let's break, but I've got two for you.
Oh,
better than one
it's
sponsor.
a twofer. It's a twofer.
So the first one is monocreators.com. I know a lot of you guys listening have heard about this company before, and if you've heard about it, I know you love them because they make incredible quality gear, both in guitar cases, backpacks, pedalboard cases. They do some of the best soft bags around, both for the pedalboards and guitars. I've joked in the past, Brian has their whole lineup of backpacks for different occasions. One for date night with the wife, one for playing a gig, one if he's going around the corner for a coffee. You got
our diaper bag. We got a diaper bag.
Thank you. That's one I haven't thought of yet. And Mono makes sure that everything, you know, shows up intact, protected, and good to go. Mason uses their double gig bag. I use their pedal boards and love how much room there is underneath to place power supplies, junctions, pedals, whatever you don't need instant access to on top. So big fan of monocreators.com. Use the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, and get 10% off your order. Great company. The other one I want to tell you about is Besttronics, or BTPA.com. They are big enough to have all the pedal board and gear supplies you need, but small enough to offer you professional and tailored service. So if you're going to BTPA, just ask for Brad. You'll be glad you did. And you can use the coupon code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, and you will get 10% off your order at Besttronics as well, which is BTPA.com. for some incredible gear and supplies.
I gotta say, I'm gonna go try to start a petition that Mono makes a suitcase that I can have matching suitcases. Big roller suitcase, maybe a little one. I'm just saying.
Yep.
I love, but it wouldn't be Mono. It would be like Duo.
Maybe a T-shirt that goes along with it if you have all the Mono gear, and you could just say, "I've got Mono fever." And you could just walk through the airport with that. But
even that T-shirt would have multiple zippers because it just has so many pockets. You're just like, I could fit so many things right here. I could put snacks right there.
Yep.
Great. I agree with that. I agree.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see what they say.
All right. So let's kind of wrap some of this stuff up. So after the volume pedal, I feel like there's a lot less objectionable stuff.
Yeah.
They go into modulation next, which I think is the right move. They have a Boss CE2W. I don't think that there's any objections here that any of us would have. And he also talks about this could be tremolos, vibratos, chorus, could all be things that would go here.
Flanger.
He mentions flanger and phaser as kind of like two other things, and he actually has a phaser a little later on. I disagree with this position, but I don't think that it's indefensible like some of the other stuff that he said. I think that the position of phaser and flanger, if we're talking about classic use cases like a Van Halen or like Howard Leese on Barracuda, those are generally before the gain because they were using the amp as the gain. And so those modulation pedals were closer to the guitar before the overdrive and gain and distortion section, just like how Van Halen used them in front of a gained up Marshall, not after. So I would suggest actually putting these before your gain section, like in particular phase and flanger. But the chorus, tremolo, vibrato, I think is fine after. This would also be early on in the chain. Could also be like univibe. But this is could be a taste thing. So there could be a case to be made to put it where he put it. But I would just put that as an aside.
And I would probably, to be honest, I'm not a huge phaser flanger guy. If I was to use it, I would probably be more inclined to put it after the gain for my board, mainly because if I turn it on, I want to know it's on. And if I want it subtle, I'll just turn down the mix or whatever, the blend, whatever it is for that pedal. But totally agree. It's a flexible taste thing. And I think if the use case is I want to sound like Van Halen, you're not going to put it after your gains. You're going to put it before.
Correct.
But I do not want to sound like Van Halen, nor can I. So I put it later in the chain.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's very flexible in the chain. More often I see it closer to the beginning of the chain than do I see it after. But there are some rare circumstances where someone's like, no, so often it's like, well, just tell me where the best place is to put this. And it's never just like, oh, just put it here. It's like, what are you trying to achieve out of that? Like you always say, those questions. What are you trying to achieve out of it? What's the type of tone you're going for? Oh, there's all these questions. And, putting in the very front of the chain versus putting after drives, like before or after drives, it will drastically, it could sound different, but, they both sound amazing. So, yeah, I mean, I get more of pre-drives, but it also does sound really great post-drives.
And then from there, it goes on to delay and then reverb. And I think that for most people, that's a pretty standard order. And he also mentions that you could reverse this order, which I've done on many occasions for certain things. The only thing I would disagree with what he said is he said that if you want a more spacious and ambient setting, running it in this order, whereas delay into reverb is preferable. And I don't think that that's true. I mean, I think that both of them are going to be pretty ambient and spacious no matter what you do. And even if you're talking about like shoegaze guys, they might run some of this stuff up front near the guitar. And we'll get some really ambient and spacious tones. So I don't know that I would necessarily qualify any order as being more ambient or spacious. I think really the only difference if you reverse the order of delay and reverb is, do you want the reverb on every delay trail or not? And that's the main differentiator that I would say between these two. And we have Oakley here
Chairmen.
to help us
3.5
finish off. Yeah, Oakley, and he brought his brush with him.
Yes.
There we go. He's well groomed.
Yes, look at that, Oakley.
That's his tone brush, right?
This is his tone brush. Yeah, he uses this. Look, Oakley. Everybody's here. Yeah. They're here to see the number one baby in tone.
Love it.
Yeah.
I actually will say on the delay into reverb into delay, I did a video on this a while ago on YouTube, just being totally honest, saying like, I'm running my reverb into my delay into reverb, changing the order. And on the videos, like, I can't hear a difference. And I had a guy comment with an article, a very physicsy, sciencey article that was very quickly over my head, saying it actually, on math, you do the math on this, it literally does not matter until you introduce some sort of gain built into the delay and or the reverb. And so I'd be curious what you guys think, if you actually can hear a difference, or if it's like a psychosomatic thing of like, oh yeah, I hear the trails.
I think the same guy commented on one that we did, and there's a lot of holes in what it is that he's saying.
Interesting.
And people who are on the acoustic side of things, I think, would disagree with him heavily. But I would predict also he's not a guitar player. Like he's a toothpaste on pizza guy.
Yeah. So he's my guy. Is what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I will say, even without the article, I struggled, at least with my settings. I A/B'd them blindly, and I could not hear a difference. So I'm sure that if you change settings, modulation, whatever it was within the delay and reverb units, maybe you could. But I don't think it's one of those effect order changes where you're going to hear drastic changes. At best, I think it's subtle. But for my ears, I struggled to hear a difference.
Yeah. I've, having some switchers with the capability of rearranging, it's really easy just to go ahead and test it, or just plugging stuff in. Just to, if you have the opportunity to take, to have two pedals and do that exact thing, try it out. Don't just go Googling it or read about it. Like, just try it out. But I have done this, and I'm actually the same boat. I couldn't really tell a difference. If it was ever so lightly, but like someone would be like, well, then what about my reverbs and my delay repeats? And I'm like, okay, well, yes, but then technically everything is in your delay repeats that you have before the delay. So like, what's the reverb? Or, what did the reverb do? So, I don't disagree with what they're saying. I've never done reverb into delay. Man, I had someone put a Hall of Fame Mini very first in their chain and then all their pedals. And I asked why, and he says, I just like how it sounds.
Yep.
And I said, okay, great. So that's how you like it. So, I mean, it's such a personal preference.
So I think the last thing that we can end on about this, and this is kind of where the signal path component of the video ends. He gets into what he calls utility pedals. He talks about noise gates, EQs, effects loops, and buffers. He doesn't really even talk about them too much. He just says that these are pedals that are used to address issues that you may be having in the effects chain, and then you use them as needed. And I would just say I disagree with, an EQ is an important pedal, I think, on most rigs if you care about tone shaping. If you want to be able to carve things out, it's pretty much a staple on most session players' rigs. I think it's definitely, like, I can endorse it as saying it's a utility pedal. I think a volume pedal is also a utility pedal, and that wasn't categorized as such. But I think that's certainly something that I think was worthwhile having in the signal path and not separated as a utility pedal. And certainly the buffer element, I think, is a huge missed opportunity that people with signal path are not going to understand that. And even if it's just talking about identifying pedals that have good built-in buffers to start with, even if you're not talking about separate devices, which they do to a degree on the article side, but the recommendations are not high-quality recommendations. They're just kind of like whatever. They don't talk about the qualifications or anything like that. The noise gate, he just says you could put it after your gain pedals, but again, there's no distinction for like what happens if you're talking about amp noise versus pedal noise versus guitar noise, where the noise gate should go, and what about if it's a 4-cable noise gate versus a 2-cable noise gate. I think that was a missed opportunity. And then effects loop, he says it, but he never talks about what he means. Like, is he talking about the effects loop of the amp? Is he talking about like effects loops where there's like a looper pedal, or like a MIDI switch programmable looper? I don't know what he's talking about. And he never differentiates the signal path. If you do have an effects loop or you do use stereo, it's just a mono all in front. So there isn't really a lot of opportunities for expansion there. What do you guys think about kind of the utility pedal completion component of the video and article?
Yeah, I would say similarly to what you just said, the buffers thing I was a little surprised by, that it was just a bit of an afterthought, because it just does make such a drastic difference on your board. And so I was a bit surprised about that. The EQ thing, I personally have a different approach to, but in general, I think as well, just kind of tossing it out as an afterthought was a bit of a mistake. So yeah, I think maybe they ran out of time. I have no idea. And maybe they had to edit things, which is possible, but I think it was a little unfortunate to kind of end it off that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think EQ pedals are like, people kind of throw them away, like, oh, I don't need that or whatever, but like they can really be utilized in so many different aspects of the board. From the input, I've seen people use it as like a boost pedal. So it, there's a lot of different options and a few things that they did for those type that, yeah, it was definitely a missed opportunity to kind of give a better advantage of how to utilize those guys.
I would say, though, I don't know if Mason, if you have anything more to say on this part of the article, but my favorite part of the video came after this.
Oh, where he started to experiment with different orders?
Yeah, and less about his experimenting and more about the philosophy of there is a lot of area for creativity when it comes to signal chain. And I love that he spent some time talking about, like, try and break the rules, see what happens, and see if you can kind of personalize and tailor your sound. And I think the biggest lesson there, in my opinion, which a lot of people just want a quick, easy answer for, which is a mistake in my opinion, is that I think you need to spend time with your pedals, your pedal board, mess around with the order, and put in the time to find what you really like and what your ears like. Even if you end up with the following the rules type of signal chain, you'll know why, and you'll have the experience to back it up.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, guys, it seemed like this was just a rip on Reverb, and I promise that my intent is not to damage Reverb's credibility, even if I had that power. I don't. But what I do hope happens is that somebody at Reverb will see what it is that we're talking about, and hopefully take stuff like this more seriously, because I feel like certain elements of this clearly could have been better done. And I don't think that it would be hard for them to find somebody that would be able to really get them on the right path with this, whether they asked you or Brian, you Grant, you Brian, me, or any number of pedalboard rig builders that would be happy to collaborate with Reverb on this sort of thing, and tell them, again, there is some subjectivity, but I think that there were some really basic things here that were missed. It kind of shows me that maybe they didn't really do their homework as far as the quality of information here, and they are a trusted source. And so there's going to be people now that are going to be putting germanium fuzzes after their overdrive pedals, and they're going to think that that's the way that it should be. And then there's all this conflict with the article. It was like, as Brian said, I don't think that they were written and recorded in sync with each other. And so it seems like they're almost in conflict with some of the things that they suggest, the way that the signal path works, the pedal choices that represent those types of pedals. It's just kind of all over the place. So I'm disappointed in that, but I think that there is hope, and there's always an opportunity to do another video or to rehash a new signal path or print a correction. That's part of being in journalism and improving. So hopefully we'll see something like that.
I think we all want the same thing here, and that is a world in which our kids grow up where there are not articles telling you to put a fuzz after a buffer. That's all I want. And so far that world doesn't exist, but I like to think we did our small part today in creating this new and better world.
Yeah, there are no more government subsidies for bad signal paths.
That's it. Those are my final thoughts. I don't know if you guys have anything else.
That's what we say, Oakley.
I would just add to it all comes down to doing research. It's not taking just this one article and running with it, and like reading this article and throwing out your entire board and starting from scratch. Like, don't do that. Like, You read this article, search another article. It's like any of us going, like me, I'm car shopping right now. So I did not see the first car online and go, yep, I'm buying that one. I searched 20 different sites and I looked at 20 different reviews and I asked people about it and I drove that car and I drove other cars before I'm going to go spend the money or drastically make the changes to whatever, like this would be a board. But I would just say it always comes down to doing your research. It's your money, you gotta just choose how you spend it. But it's it's hard work what you've done to get the money. So just doing your research to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're gonna do it. So.
Yep. All right. Well, with that, Chairman, we will complete for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And Brian, if you need a good car, Grant's selling a Mazda Miata, so just a heads up.
I'm not selling. I'm not selling, guys. That was a mistake. I'm holding on to this thing for life.
All right, guys. See ya.
All right.
See ya.
See ya.